On this week's show, the Georgia Southern baseball team in the midst of a win streak against some ranked opponents. We'll also check in with the Georgia Southern softball team and see how things are going. All that and more as we welcome you inside the Eagles Nest. Welcome inside the Eagles Nest. I'm your host, Josh Aubrey, being joined by Mike Anthony, sports editor and Georgia Southern beat writer for the Statesboro Herald. And Mike, we're going to begin with the Georgia Southern Eagle baseball team, who are coming off winning 2 out of 3 against the defending national champs up in Conway, South Carolina. So you go on the road and knock them off, and then you go on the road to Macon and knock off nationally ranked Mercer, and didn't really seem to have any trouble with them at all. Scored 15 runs. You had one guy hit his first ever home run. Another, Jordan Wren, had 8 RBIs. And then they come back home on Wednesday to take on Mercer again. Your thoughts on where the Eagles are at this point?
Well, we've talked about it throughout the season. I think it's safe to say that Georgia Southern, they haven't quite reached their potential yet, but they are hitting their stride. You've got the pitching and hitting finally on the same page as one another on the days, or now, more notably, innings where one might have a bad turn of things, the other's able to pick things up right away, and it's not lasting for entire series or entire games like we saw earlier in the year. It can be just a few runs scored in an inning or a few errors committed in an inning. The offense picks it up, or if the offense goes dry for one time through the order, the pitching picks it up. And when you can adjust like that from inning to inning throughout a game, that's when you have a very tough baseball team to beat. That's exactly what Georgia Southern proved it is over the last 4 games. You mentioned a Coastal team, defending national champions, 29th in the rankings. Mercer, 24th in the rankings with 35 wins, 2 more than any other team in Division I. It takes solid baseball, solid defense, solid hitting to get those wins. And an impressive one against Mercer, but I think more impressively, 3 one-run games. They drop 1, but they win 2 of them, the last 2, to get that series win at Coastal Carolina. Their first series loss at Coastal Carolina in 2 years.
So the Eagles finding themselves on top in the Sun Belt right now as far as the overall record goes, which could go a long way because we've mentioned the Sun Belt should be and could be a multi-bid league. And so the more wins you get, the closer you get to that 40-win plateau or thereabouts, you've got a good chance of getting an at-large berth in a very good conference. Let's get out and take a look at some of the highlights from this past weekend's 3-game series against Coastal and then taking on Mercer this week. The first of 3 in Conway, South Carolina, Georgia Southern and Coastal Carolina in the third. 3-1 Coastal, Jordan Gore with a shot through the gap. The throw off the mark, and it's 4-1 Coastal. 2 on later for Peyton Isaacson. The shot down the line. The double scores 2. Coastal up 6-1 after 3. Georgia Southern comes back to make it interesting late, but Coastal will hang on to win by a final count in Game 1 of 6-5. So we move ahead to Saturday, and Georgia Southern up 2-1 in the third, but Coastal Carolina ties things up with the RBI single into left by Jordan Gore to make it 2-2. We move to the 6th. The game now tied at 3. And tied no more, Mason McWhorter up and away. The solo shot to left center. Georgia Southern takes a 4-3 lead. Fast forward, bottom of the 9th. Georgia Southern up a run. Coastal ties things up on the throwing error. In comes the runner to make it 5-5. We're heading to extra innings in the 10th with the runner on second. McWhorter with a big game. He singles up the middle. In comes Ryan Cleveland, giving the Eagles a 6-5 lead. McWhorter 3 for 5 in the game, 3 RBIs. Georgia Southern wins 7-6 the final. So we move on to Sunday, the rubber match between the two teams. Another beautiful day for baseball in Conway, South Carolina. Coastal able to take the early lead as they string together a few singles to take it up 1-0. And then in the 5th, a pair of singles with 2 outs would make it 2-0 Coastal. Georgia Southern would cut the lead to 2-1 in the 7th, and then come back to win this one thanks to some trouble in the Coastal bullpen by a final count of 3-2. Georgia Southern at 23rd ranked Mercer. Danny Edgewood with the single into right. Ryan Hagan scores from second. The Bears trail 2-1. Next up, Charlie Madden gets all of this one. A 2-run homer, and Mercer would lead 3-2 in the top of the third. One on. Jordan Wren squares up and puts this one up and away. A 2-run homer, and the Eagles with a 4-3 lead. Top of the fourth. One on for Stephen Curry, and he lines one down the first base line. Logan Baldwin scores from second to give the Eagles a 5-3 lead. Still in the fourth, and a great night for Jordan Wren. He launches another home run. This a 3-run shot. He'd finish 3 for 5 with a double, 2 homers, and 8 RBIs, and the Eagles win by a final count in this one of 15-7. The two teams meeting again at J.I. Clements on Wednesday in a homecoming for former Statesboro High standout Jackson Ware. He collects a single in the second here for the Bears. Moments later, his Mercer teammate Trey Truitt gives the visitors the 1-0 lead with the RBI single through the right side. The Eagles in an early hole. Georgia Southern pitcher Brian Eichhorn settles in and registers a couple of strikeouts to keep it a 1-run game. The former Richmond Hill standout would strike out 6 in 6 innings of work. The Eagles knotting things up in the fourth. Runner on third for Evan McDonald. The senior with the shot to right center. That'll go down for a double. In comes Ryan Cleveland. The game is tied. Mercer then helps Georgia Southern take the lead with the bases loaded. Stephen Curry's hit by the pitch. That plates a run, and the Eagles would go on to complete the midweek sweep with a 4-3 victory in 10 innings.
Hey, Miss Thompson, everything's fine. It's going to be no problem. I'll have you done in a few minutes.
My name is Paisley Nordhoff, part owner of Complete Car Care, and I want you to come see me.
So next up for the Eagles, they have Little Rock coming in. This is another series where they should be favored. If they could win 2 out of 3 or even sweep, it's a great position for the Eagles to be in with this and then 3 more conference series left for the season. So, we like to see the Eagles be able to make a move right now or keep it right where they've got it from now on out. All right. Well, as for the softball Eagles, they are coming off losing 2 of 3 at home against a very good Texas State team who had beaten 4 ranked teams coming in, and I believe they're right there, either 23rd, 24th ranked in the nation. The Eagles with a midweek series against Savannah State. We'll have some highlights of that in just a moment. But first, your thoughts on where the Eagles are on softball diamond right now.
A tough series loss for the Eagles, especially after winning the first game of that series. This was, we mentioned last week, a few series left in the softball schedule for Georgia Southern. 2 of them against 2 of the 3 teams that are ahead of them in the conference standings. So I think it definitely proved a point that Georgia Southern can hang with anybody in the top of this conference. Would have been really nice to get the series win, maybe jump up a spot or 2, but now it just it shows where the Eagles are, what they need to do. 1 series left against South Alabama, a very good team that's having maybe a down year by their standards, so a dangerous series there against South Alabama, and then ending up on the road against Georgia State. That could easily determine a 2, 3, maybe 4 seed. Right now, the Eagles still sitting in that fourth position. Georgia State just above them. It would be nice to get maybe the 6 games left, maybe 4 wins, hopefully 5 wins. That should be enough to get them into the top 3.
All right, well, let's get out and see some highlights from their Wednesday midweek matchup with Savannah State. Georgia Southern hosting Savannah State in a midweek series, the first of 2, and Dixie Rayleigh getting some nice defensive help as India Davis makes the play in shallow right. Lydia Witkowski singles up the middle. In the second, Davis scores, and it's 1-0 Eagles. Next, Michaela Freeman able to reach on an error here. Witkowski scores to make it 2-0. Then after a double steal made it 3-0. Shelby Wilson off the error at third. Beats it out, and Emily Snyder makes it 4-1. More good defense. Shortstop Alicia Mann covering ground to make the catch. And then in the third, it's Macy Weeks up, and away to right. The opposite field power. The Eagles take game 1 8-1 and go on to win game 2 7-0. The final. Well, next up for the Eagles, as you mentioned earlier, Mike, on the road at South Alabama, and then they wrap things up on the road at Georgia State. Well, as for the golf teams, we mentioned last week that the women didn't have a very good outing in their Sun Belt championships. As for the guys, very impressive. You had Stephen Fisk and Jake Story battling it out for individual medalists. That ended up going to Fisk, and then the Eagles were second after stroke play, went into the match play, did well, knocked off Arkansas State, then went up against Georgia State and fell just shy, but it looks like everything is pointing to the fact that the Eagles will probably get an at-large berth to the postseason.
Well, Georgia Southern definitely goes into, or hopefully goes into the postseason as a team playing, right at the top of its capabilities. Maybe a few hiccups along the way in the fall, but since the calendar turned over to the spring half, you look at those finishes, top fives in nearly every tournament, and when you're Georgia Southern, you aren't just playing against some scrub teams. There's top 10, at least top 20 teams in every single tournament that they play. A conference championship, it's always going to be a difficult setup, a good showing there for Georgia Southern, as you mentioned, coming down to just the final few holes in the match play format. It was interesting to see them get a taste of match play, not something that a lot of college golfers are used to, but I think the Eagles held their own. Hopefully they get to see some of the same, as that's how the NCAA championships are now decided over the last couple of days. But as of right now, it's pins and needles time for the Eagles. On May 5th, they'll tune in. That's the national selection show. They were ranked 59th going into last week. There's no hard science to it. A certain number doesn't mean that you're automatically in. But I think that overall, looking at the course of work for the Eagles this season, it would be very hard to hold this team out.
And Mike, you mentioned about how good the opposition has been that Georgia Southern has seen throughout the year. All we have to do is look back at the Schenkel alone. It looks like at least 9, maybe even 10 teams from the Schenkel field will be going to the postseason. And, we say year in, year out how good the Schenkel field and the field are that Georgia Southern plays. Maybe not a lot of teams that people are familiar with, but really good golf programs, at least, this year, teams like Lipscomb, North Florida, Jacksonville. You may see a lot of those teams in the postseason, and hopefully the Eagles will join them. We'll let you know when that selection is announced. All right, well, that'll wrap things up for now. For Mike Anthony, I'm Josh Aubrey. Thanks for joining us. Hope to see you again next week.